You don't belong here. Get the hell out. The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the opulent hush of the Ethelgard Tower's grand rotunda. They were a raw, jagged edge against the polished Italian marble, a grotesque stain on the pristine air that smelled of money and imported lilies. It was 11:16 a.m., deep in the heart of Chicago's financial district, inside a five-star cathedral of wealth where 10 colossal teardrop chandeliers dripped crystal light, and not a single soul seemed to possess an ounce of humility. Arthur Finch, the hotel's general manager, stood fortress-like behind the onyx front desk. His arms were crossed, a thick gold signet ring glinting on his pinky finger. His chin was lifted at an angle of supreme arrogance, his lips curled into a sneer of utter contempt. His voice hadn't just been loud, it was a weapon, purposefully calibrated to detonate in the vast, echoing space, ensuring every guest, every bellhop, every polished surface bore witness to the humiliation he was dispensing. The target of his venom was a woman, a black woman. She stood alone, a figure of striking stillness amidst the calculated chaos of luxury. She wore charcoal-gray joggers tailored with architectural precision, a cashmere turtleneck the color of a stormy sky, and scuffed, defiant leather boots that spoke of miles walked and worlds navigated. There was no gaudy watch on her wrist, no ostentatious designer handbag slung over her shoulder. There was only a single, sleek carry-on bag at her side, and a face, a mask of profound, weary calm, that said this was not her first crucifixion. That woman was Seraphina Jones, and in precisely 17 minutes, she was going to systematically dismantle the careers of every single person who had dared to look through her and see nothing. But in that frozen moment, she offered no reaction. Not a word of protest, not a flinch of her eye. She just held Arthur's gaze, her own eyes level, radiating a serenity so profound it was unnerving, like a deep ocean weighing the petty rage of a surface storm. "Security is on its way," Arthur added, the sneer now blooming into a smug, triumphant smirk. His voice dripped with condescension. "You can't just wander in off the street, little lady, and claim the celestial suite. This isn't a shelter. This is the Ethelgard." The entire rotunda seemed to hold its breath. A woman adorned in diamonds, halfway to the elevator bank, froze mid-stride, her Manolo Blahniks glued to the floor. A young bellhop, balancing a tower of designer luggage, hesitated, his cart wobbling precariously. And from the shadows behind a plush velvet divan, a teenage girl, almost invisible until now, slowly, deliberately raised her smartphone. The small red light of the recording indicator glowed like a single defiant ember in the dark. Seraphina's gaze swept across the room, absorbing every frozen tableau, every averted glance, every venomous whisper. This script was painfully, intimately familiar. The dialogue changed, but the theme remained relentlessly constant. At 24, she had been escorted out of a tech conference she was meant to be keynoting, mistaken for a caterer by an overzealous security guard who'd grunted, "Deliveries are in the back." At 32, a high-end art gallery owner had refused to allow her a private viewing of a Rothko she was prepared to purchase outright, telling her condescendingly, "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the gift shop." And now, at 39, standing in the lobby of a hotel her capital had literally pulled from the brink of bankruptcy, the same tired, toxic narrative was playing out once again. Different gilded cages. Same old contempt. Before we dive deeper into this abyss, I have to ask, where are you watching this from right now? Go ahead and drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe that dignity is not a privilege but a fundamental human right, do me a solid and smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps us bring stories like this out of the shadows and into the light where they belong. We're so damn glad you're here. Now, back to Serafina, standing on the precipice of the storm. Ma'am, I am asking you one last time to leave before this gets ugly, Arthur repeated, his voice now a booming declaration of authority. He was performing for his audience now, mistaking his bigotry for professionalism. Serafina's hands never left the cool, metal handle of her suitcase. She made no move to brandish an ID, no attempt to flash a black card or a set of credentials. She simply stood there, anchored, immovable, waiting. The chime of the grand entrance bell had barely faded when Serafina Jones had first stepped inside. There was no fanfare, no sleek black car pulling up to the curb. She had simply emerged from the city's ceaseless flow, a quiet specter gliding through the revolving doors and across the fossil-inlaid marble. The wheels of her suitcase didn't squeak. The soles of her boots barely whispered against the polished floor. Yet, somehow, her very presence had disturbed the meticulously curated tranquility of the space. She wasn't just a guest. She was a dissonance in their symphony of exclusion. She wore no logos, no screaming brand names, no uniform of the elite, just that understated turtleneck, travel pants that moved with a liquid grace, and a single carry-on that had tasted the air of more continents than the hotel's entire staff combined. She radiated an aura not of wealth, but of power, an intrinsic, unassailable force that needed no external validation. Behind the sweeping curve of the front desk, Arthur Finch had clocked her the instant she entered. It wasn't because she was loud or demanding. It was because she was the exact opposite. She moved with an unapologetic ownership of her space, a quiet confidence that irritated Arthur on a cellular level. It was an audacity he couldn't stomach. Serafina approached the desk. Her voice, when it came, was low and clear, like the toll of a distant bell. Checking in. The name is Jones, Serafina Jones. Arthur didn't bother with a smile. He didn't even grant her a full glance. He merely tapped at his keyboard with a theatrical, deliberate slowness, each keystroke a small act of aggression. You booked the Celestial Suite? The words curled from his lips as if they were laced with poison, heavy with disbelief. That's correct, Serafina replied, her calm unwavering. Arthur finally deigned to look up at her. He truly looked at her this time, his eyes sweeping over her form in a cold, invasive assessment. A flicker of something, discomfort, confusion, perhaps even a sliver of fear, crossed his face before it was swiftly buried under a thick layer of procedural condescension. I'll need to see a photo ID and the credit card used for the booking. Serafina produced them both from a slim leather wallet, her movements fluid and unhurried. There was no hesitation, only a quiet, resolute clarity. Arthur took the ID card from her, pinching it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. His gaze darted from the smiling, confident face on the card to the impassive, powerful face of the woman standing before him, then back again, and that's when the gears began to shift. The delay that followed was not technical. It was personal. It was a barricade he was building brick by brick. He tapped a few more keys on his keyboard, his brow furrowed in a pantomime of diligence. He tapped again. Then he leaned conspiratorially towards the junior staffer beside him, a young woman named Maya, who looked barely out of her teens, her face a mask of anxious neutrality. He whispered, his voice a venomous hiss meant only for Maya, but loud enough for Serafina to hear clearly. Another scam artist trying for the penthouse. Get ready to call security. Maya didn't respond. She just blinked once, her gaze fixed on her own monitor, trying desperately to become invisible. Arthur straightened up, his focus returning to Serafina. His voice was now coated in a sickly sweet layer of false concern. I'm sorry, ma'am, but there seems to be an issue with your reservation. The system is showing that suite as already occupied. A single, elegant eyebrow rose on Serafina's forehead, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. Occupied by whom? I couldn't say, ma'am. Perhaps you have the wrong date, or maybe you're at the wrong hotel. Serafina didn't move. She had heard that line before, in a dozen different lobbies, boardrooms, and exclusive clubs. At 18, trying to open her first business bank account, the loan officer had asked if she was in the right place. At 29, when she'd tried to lease premium office space in a downtown skyscraper, the leasing agent had assumed she was there to deliver lunch. Now, here, at 39, a self-made titan of industry whose net worth could purchase this entire city block 10 times over, the same exhausting narrative returned. Different attire, millions in the bank, and still, she was met with a presumption of fraud at the door. She let out a single, slow breath, a controlled release of a frustration that had been simmering for 2 decades. I booked the suite under a corporate account. My name should be on your executive arrivals list. Arthur didn't even pretend to look. He slid her ID and credit card back across the counter, the plastic clattering with more force than was necessary. There's an issue with the verification process. I'm going to have to ask you to wait over there, he said, gesturing with a flick of his wrist towards a hard, uncomfortable-looking bench tucked away near the service entrance. It was a piece of furniture reserved for delivery drivers and weary tourists, not for executives paying $25,000 a night. The ambient chatter in the rotunda began to falter. A couple engaged in a quiet conversation near the grand fireplace paused, their heads turning. Someone whispered, audible in the sudden hush, "Is there a problem?" Arthur, sensing his audience, raised his voice a notch. "Ma'am, I said please step aside until we can fully confirm your details. You're holding up the line." Serafina's gaze dropped, not in shame, but in cold, hard calculation. She was mapping the battlefield, assessing every variable, every potential move and countermove. Then her eyes met his again, her voice as calm and unyielding as granite. "Are you absolutely certain this is the path you wish to take, Arthur?" Arthur's smile was a cruel, razor-thin line that didn't come close to reaching his eyes. "I'm certain that this hotel does not hand out keys to its most exclusive suite to walk-ins with fabricated stories." It was at that moment that Maya, the young staffer, risked a glance upwards, just for a fraction of a second. She said nothing, but her eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension, screamed the truth. She had seen the name on the VIP list. She knew exactly who Serafina Jones was. And now she was being forced to watch her boss gleefully immolate his own career on a pyre of his own prejudice. Maya had barely averted her gaze when Arthur picked up the house phone, his movements sharp and self-important. "This is the front desk," he announced into the receiver, his voice echoing with authority. "I require a security presence in the Grand Rotunda, immediately." Serafina heard every word. The entire room did. She hadn't threatened anyone. She hadn't raised her voice, and yet she was being treated like an imminent threat. "Potential guest dispute," Arthur added, pouring gasoline on the fire. "Possible fraudulent booking." The words were no longer about verification. They were about public degradation. They were designed to strip her of her dignity, to brand her as a criminal in front of a jury of her supposed peers. Serafina didn't react. She simply glanced down at her phone, her thumb hovering over the screen for a moment, before slipping it back into the pocket of her coat. She wasn't here to engage in a shouting match. She was here to gather data. Across the lobby, a distinguished woman in a navy pantsuit leaned over and whispered to her husband, "This is absurd. The woman hasn't done a single thing wrong." A family at the nearby coffee bar paused mid-sip, their pastries forgotten, their attention captivated by the unfolding drama. The grand rotunda, moments ago a symphony of light chatter and clinking glasses, now thrummed with a palpable, ugly tension. Maya shifted uncomfortably behind the desk. "Sir, I could just double-check the executive manifest if—" Arthur cut her off with a sharp, dismissive wave of his hand. "I have it under control, Maya." But he didn't, and they both knew it. Still, she said nothing more. Not yet. Then he arrived. Marcus, the security officer. He was a mountain of a man, tall and broad, in his late 40s, with the rigid posture of a man who had spent his life in uniform. He emerged from an alcove near the elevators, a heavy radio clipped to his chest, his expression one of weary resignation. He had seen this play before. Arthur gestured toward Serafina with a dramatic, accusatory flourish. "That's her, refusing to step aside. Presented a suspicious ID. She's claiming she's some sort of VIP." Marcus didn't question the order. He was a soldier, not a strategist. He simply began to walk towards her, his heavy footsteps echoing on the marble. Serafina remained perfectly still, a beacon of calm in a sea of escalating hostility. The suitcase remained at her side. Her hands were tucked into her coat pockets. There was no fear in her eyes, only a profound, unshakable stillness. Marcus stopped a few feet from her. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to move over to the seating area while we get this sorted out." Serafina's voice, when she finally spoke, was low, controlled, and resonated with an authority that seemed to momentarily startle the large man. "Can you articulate for me the specific reason I am being treated like a threat?" Marcus blinked, thrown off script. That was not the response he had anticipated. "No one said you were a threat, ma'am. I just need you to comply." "Comply with what, exactly? The request to stand silently in a corner while your manager manufactures a crisis out of a routine check-in?" Marcus shot a fleeting, uncertain glance back at Arthur, then returned his focus to Serafina. "Look, this doesn't need to be complicated." "It already is." A beat of tense silence passed. And then a sound, the distinct, sharp click of a camera shutter. A young man, late 20s, black, clad in a hoodie and a beanie, stood near a marble column. He was holding a professional-grade Canon DSLR camera, the lens aimed directly at the scene. He captured the moment in stark, irrefutable black and white. No words needed. Just the raw, unfiltered truth. Next to him, a white couple watched, their faces etched with visible disgust. The woman whispered to her husband, "This is just wrong." Arthur turned on the photographer, his face contorted in a snarl. "Hey, there is no photography allowed in this lobby." The camera did not lower. Behind the desk, Maya looked as if she wished the marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "Ma'am," Marcus said again, his voice now sterner, trying to reclaim control. "Either you step aside, or I will be forced to physically escort you from the premises." Serafina finally moved, but not backward. Forward. One single deliberate step. Then, her voice as calm and inexorable as gravity itself, she said, "You summoned security for a guest who provided a verified ID, offered no resistance, and did not raise her voice. That is the story currently being written in this room. By all of you." Arthur scoffed, a desperate sputtering sound. "Oh, please, don't you dare try to make this about race. Is that the game you're playing now?" Serafina blinked once, a slow, deliberate motion. "I'm not playing anything, Arthur. I am simply standing here. You are the one putting on this entire performance." Maya dropped her pen. It clattered loudly on the onyx counter, the sound unnaturally sharp in the tense silence. Across the rotunda, more phones began to emerge from pockets and purses, Not to make calls, to document, to bear witness. Arthur saw them, and in a spectacular failure of judgment, he doubled down. You are disrupting hotel operations. There are actual paying guests waiting. That line was the crack in the dam. From behind a luggage trolley, a man in a stylish gray pea coat, who had been watching the entire exchange, raised his voice. She is a guest, you fool! I watched her hand you her ID and credit card. Arthur froze, his mouth agape. Serafina didn't move. She didn't have to. The room was beginning to turn. Serafina Jones didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace or plead or perform for the growing audience of smartphones. She simply stood, a fixed point of immense gravity around which the rest of the room's chaotic energy swirled. Time itself seemed to bend around her, the chaos reduced to mere background noise. Marcus, the security officer, hovered in a state of suspended animation. His job was to handle the predictable: belligerent drunks, entitled socialites, screaming children. But this woman was something else entirely. She didn't move like a problem to be solved. She moved like a verdict waiting to be delivered. Arthur, his face now a blotchy red, was still flailing, trying to shore up his crumbling authority with sheer volume. Look, this is very simple, he snapped, his voice tight with desperation. If you do not leave these premises now, I will have you arrested for trespassing. The word trespassing landed with a thud, a heavy, discordant note in the opulent symphony of the lobby. It was loud and it was wrong. But Serafina didn't respond to him. She didn't even look at him. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her gaze finding Maya, the terrified young woman behind the desk. She held Maya's eyes, her own calm and direct, almost gentle. Maya, did you see my name in the system? Maya froze, impaled by the directness of the question. Everyone else in the room was arguing about perceptions, about procedure, about protocol. Serafina had just bypassed all of it and gone directly to the only person in the room who knew the objective truth. Maya's voice was a barely audible squeak. She swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing. I did. This morning, on the VIP arrivals list, Celestial Suite. The sentence required no punctuation. It was a puncture wound in the bloated balloon of Arthur's authority. Arthur spun on her, his eyes blazing. Excuse me, what did you say? Maya flinched but held her ground. It's there, she repeated, a little louder this time. Her name, Serafina Jones. I saw it myself. Serafina gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of thanks. Then she returned to her state of perfect, unnerving stillness. Marcus took a half-step back. His entire posture shifted in that instant, transforming from enforcer to observer. He was no longer part of the conflict. He was now a witness to the fallout. From one of the lounge chairs, a guest with a shock of silver hair whispered to his companion, My God, he knew. She knew this entire time he was lying. Arthur scrambled to regain control, his lies becoming more frantic. She's a trainee! She doesn't have the security clearance to confirm a reservation of that level. I will check the master system myself. But the illusion had been shattered. The damage was done. Maya, with a few quiet words, had cracked the foundation of his charade. And Serafina had orchestrated it all without even raising her hand. In the corner of the room, the man with the DSLR continued to shoot, his lens capturing every nuance of the shifting power dynamics. From behind the concierge desk, another junior staffer, a young Asian man named Kenji, watched with wide, intelligent eyes. His fingers hovered over his own keyboard, suspended in that terrifying space between fear of reprisal and the urge to do the right thing. Serafina stood at the epicenter of it all, a quiet, controlled inferno. No shouting, No public shaming. Just the relentless, undeniable pressure of the truth. And somehow, that was infinitely more terrifying to her antagonists than any tantrum could ever be. Arthur turned on her again, his desperation palpable. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." Now, for the first time, a sliver of ice entered Serafina's calm tone. "No, Arthur," she replied, her voice level and clear. "You are." A silence descended then. A sharp, heavy, contagious silence. The kind of silence that forces everyone in a room to finally recognize where the true power resides. The phones were still up, the live streams were still running, and the room was no longer just watching, it was judging. Across the rotunda, a small child tugged on the sleeve of her mother's coat. "Mommy, why is that man being so mean to the lady?" The mother didn't shush her. She didn't offer a placating answer. She just looked on, her face a mask of disapproval. Arthur reached for the house phone again, a lifeline to an authority he no longer possessed. But this time, his fingers hesitated, hovering over the keypad. It was a small, almost imperceptible motion, but it betrayed a devastating realization. He was no longer in control of this situation. Serafina let her gaze drift slowly around the room, measured, unshaken. Then, speaking to no one and everyone at once, she said, "Every room has a truth, and in this one, it is finally starting to speak for itself." The first voice to rise from the silence came from a plush velvet armchair near the grand piano. It belonged to a woman in her early 60s, a string of perfect pearls at her neck, and a glint of steel in her eyes. She cleared her throat and said, her voice ringing with the crisp authority of old money, "Excuse me, I was sitting right here. I witnessed that woman hand you a valid ID and a credit card. You never even attempted to check your system properly." Arthur blinked, caught completely off guard. He had not expected this. A guest, one of his own, a woman in tailored cream slacks who looked as though she had been born and raised in five-star hotels, breaking the unwritten code of wealthy indifference. But she wasn't alone. From behind the artisanal coffee kiosk, a man in his 30s, clad in a tourist's practical jacket, his half-sipped latte trembling in his hand, turned to his partner and said, his voice deliberately loud, "You think for a second they'd treat a white guy like that if he walked in wearing jeans and a backpack?" Someone else from a shadowy corner muttered, "She's been the calmest person here this whole time. He's the one who's hysterical." And then came the second click. Not a camera shutter this time. A phone being unlocked. The teenager who had been filming from behind the divan, black hoodie pulled up, red AirPods in her ears, now stood up. She held her phone high, no longer trying to be surreptitious. Recording. Boldly. Openly. "I'm not putting this away," she announced, her voice clear and defiant. "Everyone needs to see this." Arthur snapped, his authority now completely shredded. "You are violating hotel policy. That is private footage." But the girl didn't even flinch. "This is a public lobby," she replied flatly. "And what you're doing is public discrimination." Maya looked as though she might burst into tears. Serafina still hadn't moved. She was still the center, the anchor, holding her silence like a sharpened blade. Another voice joined the chorus. Deeper, firmer. It came from a man in his 50s seated near the concierge table. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit and radiated a business-class aura. "I manage corporate risk for a living," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "And I can tell you right now, this gross mishandling of a guest situation is going to cost this hotel a hell of a lot more than a single night's room rate." Arthur's mouth opened, but no words came out. His ammunition was gone. His audience had turned on him. Meanwhile, at the concierge desk, Kenji, the young staffer, had made his choice. His fingers, no longer hovering, flew across the keyboard with a quiet, determined speed. He pulled up the internal guest manifest, his eyes scanning the lines of data. And then he found it. Serafina Jones, corporate platinum tier, celestial suite, 3-night reservation, paid in full, in advance. He didn't speak. Not yet. But his lips parted slightly in a silent gasp. And across the room, Serafina saw it. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was a bond, an alignment. More phones were up now. The atmosphere had shifted. The quiet witnesses were no longer just observers. They were participants. They were the jury. Arthur tried one last, desperate gambit. He addressed the crowd of phone-wielding guests directly. To everyone who is recording this, you are misinformed. We are simply following hotel protocol. You didn't follow a damn thing, the woman in pearls retorted, her voice dripping with disdain. You profiled her? The word, profiled, rang through the opulent space louder than any shout. It cracked through the chandelier-filtered air like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the ugly truth of the situation for all to see. Maya, trembling slightly, but with a newfound resolve in her eyes, whispered, I shouldn't have stayed silent for so long. Serafina turned her head gently towards the young woman. You didn't stay silent, she said, her voice soft but clear. Not when it counted. The simple validation in her words seemed to settle a weight on everyone in the room. And then, the teenage girl who was live-streaming spoke again, her voice a running commentary for her thousands of viewers. I'm tagging every major news outlet I follow. This right here is what people are talking about when they say it's not about the yelling. It's about how they treat you when they think nobody is watching. Kenji looked up from his computer screen. His voice was low, but it was resolute. It was the voice of the truth. Her name is in the system. Arthur spun around. What? Kenji repeated, louder this time, his voice ringing with a conviction that sent a shockwave through the room. Ms. Jones, Serafina Jones, Celestial Suite, confirmed and prepaid, corporate platinum tier, highest priority access. The silence that followed this declaration was not awkward. It was an awakening. The truth was no longer hidden in a computer system. It was on display for all to see. The guests, the staff, the very marble walls and vaulted ceilings of the Ethelgard Tower all seemed to exhale at once. But Serafina? She just nodded once, as if this were all just a minor, predictable step in a much larger, more intricate plan. Just as the room began to recalibrate itself around this new, undeniable truth. The heavy double doors behind the concierge desk swung open with a decisive push. A new figure entered the fray. She was tall, blonde, her blazer so sharply tailored it looked as if it could cut glass. She held a clipboard in one hand and an air of weaponized disdain in the other. This was Veronica Croft, the hotel's director of guest operations. She walked like a final judgment, and she spoke like one too. What in God's name is going on in my lobby? Arthur, visibly relieved to pass the baton of his own incompetence, gestured wildly toward Serafina. This woman, he sputtered, his voice cracking with a mixture of outrage and relief. She refused to cooperate, falsely claimed she booked the penthouse. We have no verification. She's been harassing my staff and disrupting the entire hotel. Veronica didn't even look at Arthur. Her cold blue eyes fixed on Serafina, subjecting her to a single, sweeping, dismissive glance. That was all it took for her to reach her conclusion. It wasn't because she recognized her. It was precisely because she didn't. No expensive suit, no fawning entourage, no luggage cart piled high with emblems of status. Just a black woman, standing alone, and inexplicably in control. Her eyes narrowed to icy slits. Ma'am, she said, her voice crisp and sharp as a shard of ice. "If there is some misunderstanding regarding your reservation, I suggest you take it up with our legal department at a later date. Right now, I am officially asking you to leave this property." The lobby, which had just begun to breathe again, held its collective breath once more. The air crackled with a fresh wave of disbelief. It was the moment when everyone realizes they are watching someone not just climb, but sprint gleefully up the wrong hill to die on. Serafina didn't move. Veronica took a step closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss, making it personal. "You've created enough of a scene. This is a luxury establishment, not a stage for your protests." From the seating area, the man in the business suit muttered audibly. She didn't even ask for her name. The teenager's phone remained steadfast, the red recording light an unblinking eye of judgment. Kenji stood up from his chair. "Ms. Croft," he said, his voice trembling but firm with conviction. "Ms. Jones is in our system. I confirmed it myself. Penthouse suite, 3 nights, highest corporate clearance." Veronica turned her icy glare on him. "Kenji, that is not your place." "But it is," he shot back, a newfound courage fueling his words. "Because it's right here in black and white." He pointed emphatically at his screen. "And the only thing that's missing from this picture is the basic human respect that should have come with it." Maya looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and admiration. Serafina still hadn't said a word. She didn't need to. The room, slowly but surely, was starting to say it all for her. Veronica's gaze flickered from Kenji to Arthur, then back to Serafina, her frustration mounting. "I don't care what some trainee thinks he saw on a screen," she spat. "Your behavior is not in alignment with our hotel's values. You are making our other guests extremely uncomfortable." The woman in pearls stood up from her armchair. "That is patently untrue," she declared. Another man, the one in the tourist jacket, added forcefully, "She's the calmest person in this entire damn lobby." Veronica raised her voice, trying to shout down the growing dissent. "I am speaking with a guest." "She's not just a guest," Kenji interrupted, his voice now ringing with authority. "She's on the executive client manifest. The corporate office knows her, and if you were to check the system's audit log," he added, delivering the kill shot, "you'll see that her reservation was flagged with a verification error immediately after Arthur accessed it." Arthur's face went white, but Kenji wasn't finished. "And it wasn't flagged before that." That sentence landed on the marble floor with the shattering finality of a dropped crystal glass. The phones were still up. The DSLR man zoomed in, his lens capturing the beads of sweat forming on Veronica's forehead. Her lips pressed into a thin, white line. Serafina finally spoke. Her voice was low, calm, and as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "If this is how your hotel chooses to define its values, then you are all going to have a very, very serious problem in about 5 minutes." Veronica let out a short, sharp, derisive laugh. "Are you threatening me?" "No," Serafina said, her eyes like chips of obsidian. "I'm informing you." A beat of charged silence. Then she added, "You just made the exact same mistake Arthur did. But you, Veronica, you made yours in front of witnesses." Veronica didn't blink. She was completely impervious to the phones, to the whispers, to the rising tide of judgment that was about to crest over her. Instead, she turned to Marcus, the security officer, who was still standing by, a statue of uncertainty. She said, with a surgical coldness that sent a chill through the room, "Remove her. Now." Marcus hesitated. His feet felt as if they were nailed to the floor. "I said," Veronica repeated, her voice now a full-blown command, "Remove this woman from my property, immediately!" Serafina didn't flinch. She looked directly at Marcus, not with defiance, but with a profound, knowing clarity. The kind of clarity that wordlessly communicates, your choices are being recorded too. Then Arthur, in a last desperate act of performative dominance, lunged from behind the desk. He moved with a clumsy, aggressive speed, reaching over and grabbing Serafina's carry-on bag by its handle. He yanked it violently. The sleek, expensive suitcase scraped across the pristine marble floor with a sickening, discordant shriek, a sound that spoke of violation. Arthur dropped the bag at Marcus's feet with a contemptuous thud. "There!" he snarled. "Escort her and her belongings out. She is done here." Serafina's eyes followed the journey of her bag. It now lay on its side, tilted and scuffed. Her voice, when she spoke again, remained eerily even, devoid of any anger. "You just placed your hands on my personal property, without cause, without my consent, and certainly without any legal authority to do so." Arthur sneered, emboldened by his petty act of aggression. "You're lucky that's all I touched." A collective gasp went through the lobby. It came from the woman with the pearls. Maya took a step back from her station, her hand flying to her mouth. Kenji's face drained of all color. Even Veronica's triumphant smile faltered for a fraction of a second. From the far side of the rotunda, the teenager who was live-streaming whispered into her phone's microphone, her voice trembling with outrage. He just grabbed her bag. He just grabbed it, like he owned her." Then came the flash, a brilliant, blinding flash from the DSLR camera. Then another phone went live on TikTok, then another on Instagram. The room was no longer just a scene of a dispute, it was a crime scene, and then, with a grace that was almost painful to watch, Serafina crouched down. She gently picked up her bag. She carefully wiped the new scuff on the marble dust with the sleeve of her cashmere turtleneck. Then she stood back up, and somehow she seemed taller than before. Taller not just in stature, but in presence, in purpose. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping past Arthur and Veronica to encompass every single guest who was bearing witness. "You escalated a situation that never existed," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the rotunda. "You laid hands on something that did not belong to you, and now—" She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle in the air. "You have both made your final, irreversible mistake." Veronica snapped. "You're delusional." But Serafina was no longer listening to her. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket. She unlocked it with a swift, fluid swipe of her thumb. She tapped the screen once. The call connected almost instantly. "Yes, ma'am," a voice replied. Calm, professional, efficient, female. "Carla," Serafina said into the phone, her voice still quiet, but now imbued with a terrifying sense of command. "Begin Protocol 5. A beat of silence, then a beep from the phone. "Confirmed, Ms. Jones," Carla's voice replied. "Internal trace has been active for the last 15 minutes. Full system logging is already underway." Arthur blinked, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Protocol what?" Serafina looked directly at her, her eyes cold and sharp. "The one," she said, "that records every single biased action and links it directly to your permanent employment record. In real time?" A silence heavier than the marble pillars fell over the rotunda. Veronica's jaw clenched. "You're bluffing." But behind the concierge desk, Kenji let out a strangled gasp. He was staring at his own computer screen, which had suddenly lit up with a flashing crimson banner that read, "Audit mode enabled. Executive override in progress." Arthur spun toward him. "What the hell is that?" Kenji couldn't answer. He couldn't do anything. The system was no longer theirs to control. From the coffee bar, a woman wearing glasses murmured to her husband, "Oh my God, she's not bluffing. She's been preparing for this the entire time." Serafina slipped her phone back into her coat pocket. She turned, with a slow and deliberate grace, to face Veronica. You touched my name, my reputation, and now my property. Then her gaze shifted to Arthur. And you did it all in public. Marcus, the security officer, took another step back. Then another. He wanted to be as far away as possible from the blast radius of what was about to happen. Serafina took one small step forward. Calm, centered, lethally composed. You wanted a spectacle, she said, her voice now dropping to a near whisper, a sound that was somehow more menacing than any shout could ever be. Now you will all watch what justice actually looks like. Carla's voice came again through Serafina's phone, clearer this time, tighter. Ms. Jones, I have activated a full forensic trace across all hotel staff digital interactions for the past 45 minutes. Voice pattern analysis from lobby audio is matched. Surveillance camera feeds are synced. And guest witness proximity logs are now live and compiling. Veronica stiffened, her face a mask of disbelief. What is this? Who in the hell are you calling? Serafina ignored her. She was already in motion. She wasn't just walking. She was asserting her dominion. She strode behind the front desk, to the very spot that Arthur had occupied like a petty throne just minutes earlier, and placed her phone flat on the polished onyx counter. The crowd of guests surged forward slightly, their own phones still raised, following her every move. Maya and Kenji both took instinctive steps back, parting before her like the Red Sea. Serafina tapped the speaker icon on her phone. Carla's crisp, disembodied voice filled the grand rotunda, each word a perfectly delivered nail in a coffin. Arthur Finch, flagged for unauthorized guest profile override and verbal misconduct. Rebecca Langston, logged as party to discriminatory harassment and advocating for unlawful detainment protocols. Arthur's voice cracked. Excuse me? Carla continued, unperturbed. Marcus Denham, security. Pending full review, but currently logged as remaining within protocol compliance. A small exhalation of relief escaped Marcus's lips. Maya Chen, flagged as first witness to guest mistreatment. Non-intervention noted. Maya's eyes widened. But I tried to... Serafina held up a hand, a gesture that was surprisingly gentle. This isn't about punishment, Maya, she said. It's about accountability. Then, her voice firmer, she spoke into the phone. Carla, initiate the silent witness sync. Confirmed, Carla replied instantly. Facial recognition identification of all guest observers now mapped and archived to the incident file. Proximity-based consent data is compiling for potential statements. Veronica grabbed the edge of the onyx counter, her knuckles turning white, as if the solid stone could anchor her against the rising tide. This isn't legal. You cannot just hijack our internal systems. But Kenji, his voice now filled with a quiet awe, slowly turned his monitor to face her. The screen was no longer the familiar hotel interface. It was now a stark black screen with a single line of text in glowing green letters. Executive Level Override. Jones Global Compliance Bridge. Active, his lips parted. She's not bluffing, Ms. Croft, he whispered. It's real. Her company's backend just seized full control of our entire network. Arthur stepped forward, his anger a last, pathetic defense against his exposure. You think you can just waltz in here, play some kind of tech god and... Serafina cut him off, her voice slicing through his tirade. I didn't waltz in here to play anything. I walked in to check into a hotel suite that I had already paid for. The rest of this... She gestured slowly around the room. All of this. You did that. From the far side of the lobby, the teenager with the live stream whispered into her feed, her voice filled with breathless excitement. Oh my God, you guys. She just flipped the entire script. She owns it all now. All of it. Then came a sharp electronic chime, a loud, final beep from the front desk terminal. Maya's screen flashed red for a moment, then went dark. Protocol 5, Stage 2, active. System lockdown. She gasped. It just froze me out. No one can log in. Carla confirmed through the speakerphone. Front desk operational systems have been locked down pending executive review. All guest data, room assignments, internal communications, and audit trails are now securely mirrored to the Jones Global Secure Cloud Compliance database. Veronica's voice finally broke. You are not allowed to do that. This isn't your system. Then came Serafina's turn. Calm. Clear. Devastating. No, she said, her voice resonating with an absolute authority that silenced the entire room. But this building, this entire block, is under a long-term management contract with my holding company, Jones Global. Your system runs on our architecture. Your compliance department reports directly to ours. A beep. Then, and I am your oversight. The room didn't cheer. It didn't have to. The profound, thunderous silence said more than any applause ever could. Gregory backed away from the desk, as if it were electrified. Rebecca stared at the elevators, a desperate, wild look in her eyes, as if they could offer her a miraculous escape. Carla's voice came one final time. Ms. Jones, do you wish to proceed to escalation and review? Serafina let out a long, slow breath. Then, she tapped the microphone icon on her phone. Begin Stage 3. The very air in the lobby seemed to shift, to thicken. It wasn't a change in temperature, it was a change in revelation. Gregory took another stumbling step back, his eyes darting towards the front entrance as if he were contemplating a desperate flight. Veronica's jaw was clenched so tightly it looked as though it might shatter, a silent scream of outrage and terror trapped behind her gritted teeth. Maya stood frozen, her lips parted, her eyes wide, watching the truth she had always suspected arrive with the force of a thunderclap. Serafina stood at the center of the vortex she had created, still perfectly composed, still unbreakably anchored. And then, without raising her voice a single decibel, she spoke. My name, she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the vast space, is Serafina Jones. She paused, letting her name hang in the air, deliberate and heavy with unspoken weight. I am the founder and the CEO of Jones Global Holdings Group. The silence that followed was sharp, absolute, and crystalline. You could have heard a diamond drop. Our portfolio, she continued, her gaze sweeping slowly, deliberately around the magnificent rotunda, includes 14 luxury properties in this city alone. The Ethelgard Tower. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the golden crest above the fireplace. Is one of them. A beat passed. Then another. Then the entire room seemed to exhale at once. It wasn't a gasp of disbelief. It was a murmur of dawning, gut-wrenching recognition. Because suddenly, in a blinding flash of clarity, everything made sense. The impossible calm. The surgical precision. The unnerving silence that carried more weight than any shouted threat. Maya whispered, almost to herself, I thought that name sounded familiar from the financial news. Kenji sank back into his chair as if the bones had suddenly been removed from his legs. Gregory looked physically ill. Veronica tried to salvage the unsalvageable, her voice stammering, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. There must have been some kind of mistake in our communication system. If you had just simply identified yourself from the beginning. Serafina's gaze turned on her, and it was sharp enough to stop a person's breath. If I had worn a Rolex, if I had arrived with a chauffeur, if I had flashed a Centurion card at the door, would you have handed me my key without a moment's hesitation? No one answered. The question was a verdict in itself. "But I didn't," Serafina continued, her voice dropping lower, becoming more intimate, more damning. "I walked in as me, quiet, black, a woman, alone." Another devastating pause. "And you decided, collectively, that I did not belong." The words weren't loud, but they shattered the remaining vestiges of civility in the room. The phones were still raised. The teenager's live stream had now surpassed 100,000 concurrent viewers. The comments section was a torrent of fire and vindication. "He owns the whole damn place." They grabbed her bag. The silence was never weakness. It was a strategy. From his seat in the lounge area, the business-suited man who had been the first to defend her nodded slowly. "I knew I recognized you," he said, his voice filled with respect. "The Forbes cover, 2 years ago. You were the one who turned this entire hotel chain around after the 2020 collapse." Serafina gave the man a small, appreciative nod. Veronica, now ghost-white, muttered desperately, We had no idea." "That is the entire point," Serafina interrupted, her voice calm, but with an edge of finality that was terrifying. "You treated a human being as less than because you assumed they were." Kenji leaned forward, his voice shaking with a mixture of awe and shame. "Ma'am, Ms. Jones, I just want to say I am so sorry." Serafina looked at him, not with judgment, but with something far heavier, far more profound. "You saw the truth, Kenji, and when the time came, you spoke it. That matters." Then her voice shifted, hardening, becoming not cold, but utterly commanding. "What does not matter, not anymore, is who I am now. What matters is who you all thought I wasn't." Veronica collapsed into a stunned, defeated silence. Gregory said nothing, his face a mask of abject horror. Behind him, Maya slowly, deliberately unpinned her name badge from her uniform jacket. She walked around the imposing onyx desk and came to stand a few feet beside Serafina, not behind her. An ally. "I'm not asking to keep my job, Ms. Jones," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am just asking for the chance to do the right thing now, because silence is consent, and I consented for far too long today." Serafina looked at her, a long, appraising look. Then she nodded. "I will remember that, Maya." Behind her, Kenji quietly logged out of his terminal and shut down his monitor. He folded his hands on his desk. "I would like to request a transfer," he said. "Not because I want to run away, but because I want to learn from leadership that actually leads." Serafina smiled, a genuine, if fleeting, smile. "You will," she said. The guests were still recording, the phones still held high, but the atmosphere had changed again. No one was watching for the drama anymore. They were witnessing a resolution. A reckoning. It started slowly, a single deliberate clap. It came from the man in the tailored gray suit near the concierge desk, steady, respectful. Then another join in, from the woman in pearls, her hands firm, her eyes shining with unshed tears. It was the kind of applause that carried both an apology and a promise. Then the couple from the coffee bar. Then the teenager with the live stream, still holding her phone high with one hand, her other clapping against her thigh. "They just found out who she is," she was saying into her microphone. "They're clapping for her now. It's really happening." Within moments, the entire lobby was filled with a rolling wave of applause. It wasn't thunderous. It was pointed. It was respectful. It was as if the room itself were offering a long overdue penance. Gregory's eyes darted wildly between the applauding guests, the sea of recording phones, the implacable woman before him. "No one ever said your race had anything to do with this," he muttered. A weak, pathetic last stand. Serafina turned her head slowly to face him. You didn't have to say it, Arthur. Your actions shouted it from the moment I walked through that door. Gregory's shoulders sagged in final, crushing defeat. Veronica took a shaky breath, the clipboard she still held trembling in her white-knuckled grip. And in that moment of silent, resounding victory, I have to ask you, the person watching this, what is the most shocking part of this story to you so far? Was it the manager's audacity? The staff's complicity? Or was it Serafina's incredible restraint? Let me know in the comments. We read every single one. And if you're getting value from this, a like and a subscribe goes a long way. Now, for the final act. The silence in the aftermath of the applause was broken by a chime. Short, digital, final. It emanated from behind the desk. Kenji's monitor, which he had just turned off, flashed once, then went permanently black. Maya's did the same. Gregory spun toward his own terminal, his face a mask of confusion. What happened? Carla's voice answered through Serafina's phone, as crisp and efficient as ever. Front desk access for all terminals has been disabled. User credentials for Gregory Finch and Veronica Croft have been revoked. Employee status has been terminated. Your physical access badges will deactivate in precisely 45 seconds. Veronica's breath caught in her throat. You don't understand, she gasped. I have worked here for 15 years. Serafina turned to face her fully, her expression calm, implacable, a force of nature. And in 15 years, you learned absolutely nothing about humility, dignity, or respect. Gregory stumbled forward, reaching for the system terminal as if he could physically will it back to life. It beeped, a single, angry red light glowing on its surface. Access denied. You don't have the authority, he whispered. I built the authority, Serafina said, her voice cutting through the room with the force of a physical blow. Brick by brick, contract by contract, server by server, name by name. Veronica looked desperately toward Marcus, the security guard. Do something! But Marcus had already stepped back even further, his hands now clasped respectfully behind his back. Neutral, observing. I follow the protocol of the property owner, ma'am, he stated, his voice flat. And my post officially ends when my shift does. Just then, the grand lobby doors slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. 2 individuals, a man and a woman, entered. They were dressed in severe, dark business suits, with subtle earpieces tucked into their ears. They moved with the calm, quiet professionalism of people who were accustomed to handling unpleasant situations. They were the corporate compliance escorts. One of them, the man, approached Gregory. Sir, he said, his voice polite but unyielding. We will be escorting you from the premises now. Gregory shook his head, his face a mess of panicked disbelief. This is insane. I didn't sign up for this kind of public humiliation. But you had no problem inflicting it on someone else. The line came from a voice in the crowd. The man in the gray suit, who was still watching, his arms crossed, his face a study in grim satisfaction. Veronica turned to Serafina one last time, her voice cracking. You could have just walked away. You could have just let this go. And what lesson, Veronica? Serafina replied, her voice soft but unforgiving. Would that have taught you? The escorts moved in. Gregory flailed his arms slightly, his voice rising in a panicked squeal. I have people. I know people in this city. Serafina met his eyes one final time. Then tell them what happened here today. Show them the footage. Let them decide if they still know you. Gregory was guided, gently but inexorably, towards the exit. Veronica followed, moving more slowly, not resisting, but as if in a state of profound shock. Her high heels clicked across the marble floor, the sound an echo of her pride, shattering into a million pieces. The guests parted before them, creating a silent, respectful path. There was no applause this time, just a reverent, profound silence. Maya turned to Serafina. Do you want us to try and reset the front desk?" Serafina shook her head. "No," she said. "Let it sit like this for a while. Let the next manager who walks in here see this moment, and remember it." Kenji looked up. "Should I notify the Regional Human Resources Department?" "They've already been looped in," Serafina replied. "Carla, give me a status update." Carla's voice came through the phone instantly. "Termination notices have been sent and acknowledged by the system. Badge access has been fully revoked. A comprehensive incident report has been archived across our legal, public relations, and executive databases. The reputation damage control review begins in 12 minutes. Serafina looked around the now quiet, transformed lobby. Then, finally, she gently took her place behind the onyx front desk. She didn't sit down. She just stood there, her hands resting lightly on the cool, solid marble. A black woman, centered, unafraid, unmistakably, unassailably in charge. And for the first time since she had walked through those doors, everyone in the room saw her. They saw her exactly as she was. Serafina Jones didn't linger. She didn't gloat. There was no triumphant smile, no final self-congratulatory speech. There was just a slow, steady, deliberate glance across the lobby that she now, so unequivocally, owned. Maya stepped aside, giving her space. Kenji nodded once, a gesture of profound respect. The man in the gray suit gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible salute. Even the teenager with the live stream for the very first time lowered her phone. Because they all understood. The show was over. The lesson, however, had only just begun. Serafina turned towards the elevator bank. Still no bellhop rushing to her side. Still no fawning assistant. She pressed the up button herself. The polished brass doors slid open with a soft, welcoming sigh. She stepped inside. Alone, but no longer unseen. As the doors began to close, her eyes met those of the teenage girl who had filmed it all. Serafina gave her a single, slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture that said everything. "Thank you. You mattered. Keep holding them accountable." The elevator doors closed, and yet they spoke volumes. Back in the hushed rotunda, the full weight of what had just transpired settled in. It wasn't just about Gregory's absence or Veronica's spectacular downfall. It was about every single person in that room who had watched a brilliant, composed, powerful black woman be treated like a problem, a threat, a fraud, until her true power demanded their respect. The woman in the pearls turned to the teenager. "Will you post the full video?" The girl looked at her phone, then back up. "It's already live," she said. "It's already gone viral." Then she looked back at the closed elevator doors. "They will never, ever look at someone like her the same way again." The woman in the pearls shook her head slowly. "No," she said softly. "But maybe, just maybe, they will start to look at themselves a little differently, too." Outside, a discreet, matte black SUV pulled up to the curb. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. Serafina emerged from the hotel a few moments later, her scuffed suitcase now held in her hand like a trophy. Her driver opened the rear door for her, but she didn't get in right away. She paused, looking up at the name of the hotel carved in magnificent golden letters above the entrance. The Etheldgard Tower. Then she looked back down. She didn't need to see her name in lights to know that it was hers. The world would remind her again and again, in 1,000 different ways, that she didn't belong. She no longer felt the need to remind it that she did. She simply was. And as she finally stepped into the quiet sanctuary of her car, she left behind something far more potent and enduring than any speech. She left behind proof. Proof not just of ownership, but of restraint. Proof of dignity without a single raised voice. Proof of power without a single threat. Proof of justice without a single theatrical flourish. And for every single person watching, in that lobby or behind a screen like you are now, the message was carved into granite. They didn't finally hear her because she shouted. They heard her because she never ever needed to. So now, what about you? Before you click away, before you move on to the next video, I want you to answer this one final question in your heart. And in the comments below, what would you have done if you had been standing in that lobby today? Would you have been a silent bystander? Would you have been one of the ones who spoke up? If you believe in the power of justice, in the non-negotiable right to dignity, and in rewriting the outdated, toxic narratives of who gets to hold power, then hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And subscribe, because Seraphina Jones is not the only one walking into rooms where she is not expected to belong. But with every story we share, we ensure that she won't be the last one to own them when she does. And we won't be the last to bear witness when it happens. Thank you for being here.